Thank you, Dave. Call this meeting of the school committee for the city of Lewiston, Maine to order for Wednesday, March 30th, 2022. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will now do school committee member introductions. We'll start with Ms. Paquette.
Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Megan Parks at large.
Janet Bowden, Ward 2.
Elizabeth Eames, Ward 3.
Jake Langley, Superintendent.
Bruce Damon, Ward 1.
Tanya Whitlow, Ward 4.
Ashley Medina, Ward 5.
Megan Hurd, Ward 6.
Paul Beauplan, Ward 7.
Linda Scott, City Council Rep.
Thank you, everyone. The next item on the agenda of this workshop is to review and revise the budget. Over to Superintendent.
So I've got some slides I'll share, put up on the screen so that we can look them over together. We've had actually 2 productive meetings since our last gathering with the finance subcommittee. We've really looked hard at a lot of items, and I want to walk you through from the direction I think the school committee had to find our way toward or to $1. And so we've done that work. It was not easy, but we did get to that goal, and we want to share how we got to that goal and share some thoughts about future planning and some multi-year items. So as you can see on the slide, today's 30th. We're going to do revisions and reductions, a multi-year look ahead, share a little information about ESSER. Those are the COVID funds, fund balance, and how we're looking at that from a future perspective. Contracted growth. This is from our collective bargaining agreements, and also some of our financial strategy, so that we can look this year real hard in the face, but also be thinking about a multi-year approach. So reductions, just going to walk through kind of like we did last time, some things that we were able to identify, working with the finance subcommittee and also through the team that you can see here over my shoulder that have worked hard on this, and also Karen. We have a family and school liaison position that is currently vacant. That is a district level position that we did not fill this year. Really, I think the intent of that role, which predates me, was around family and community connections. So I mean, highly supported. I think there's good cause for it, but we're having conversations about teachers and the number of people in staff in classrooms. And so having a vacant position like that, again, I can see the value of it, but I also can see that we are in a tight fiscal year and that needs to be reduced. We also have a med tech position that we believe we can live without. We did get our insurance rate in. And if you recall from our last set of reductions, we had initially started our budget presentation at 12%. We're trying to read the wind a bit, but we went down to 9%, feeling like that was a safe number, resulting in, I think it was $357,000 worth of savings. We received the max last Friday after their meeting Thursday night of 8%. So we were able to take another $119,000 off the top, if you want to look at it that way. Reminder that that's a max. It is not our actual. And the actual will actually get further on in the process, actually beyond the process of the school committee, hopefully adopting a budget. And so that can play into factoring for a future year. Mentor costs and supplies. We're looking at, that's a kind of a broad category, but mentor costs were brought back into this budget from ESSER. We're pushing it back out to ESSER. There's also supplies that we're pushing back out. There's a whole range of supplies that we looked at. We looked at actuals, we looked at what we could spend money on, and we came to a local savings of $171,800 combined.
Yeah, Jake, the med tech position, can you talk about that position a little bit?
Yeah, so we have different med techs for different places, and it ranges from supporting nurses to supporting individuals. So we're exploring that as an area where we can find a savings from an area that may no longer be needed.
Yeah, just a follow up. So are mostly those med techs, have they been helping the nurses mainly?
So it's a range. So we have one working at Farwell right now that's helping with nursing and other tasks. And we have, again, some working with particular students. It's actually, it can be a little confusing because it says med tech. It's actually an ed tech role. So any reduction in that area because of unfilled positions, it wouldn't be someone without a job, but it may cause a transition in a position.
Okay.
I'll start with the mentor costs and supplies. In the proposed budget, we had moved title related position and costs benefits to the local budget. We have decided to leave that in title funds. Again, those title funds are a direct impact to our classrooms, and so moving this money in and out is challenging. The hard thing with title positions, in particular this kind, is if we move it out, we can't put it back because of title rules. And so we're again compelled to make a tough decision with that one, but to say, let's leave that in title funding right now and then see where we are in the future. We do, in talking with administration, think that we can identify a teacher position. I don't have where on here. Those are conversations that are happening, but it's hard to identify that specifically in a public format until we know really where we're going to be with our budget, because I think those, depending on how this goes, may result in individualized conversations. And so I'm deliberately vague on that. But that teacher position is not something that sits vacant. It's something that we're exploring. Could we live without if we had to? There's also a vacant tech integrator position. We still need it. Dave has provided input on that position, and knowing how tight the budget is, said if you need to move that to a different funding source for the time being, that's an option. And so that's what we did there. The LRTC miscellaneous account, this goes back to our work with looking at accounts and looking at actuals. And so I had a conversation with Director Callahan, and what this account was used for was to pay for some assessments and student certifications. He has assured me that he could use federal Perkins funding if there's a need to go above the already budgeted amount. So this is not the whole amount. This is a piece of that has been going unspent year after year that he believes he can live without. And if there are more kids that take certain assessments and get go for certain certifications that they would provide the opportunity for, he has other sources to fund that. So this will not impact kids negatively. He's going to be mindful about how that gets paid for if they exceed that budgeted amount. Special ed also had a miscellaneous account. And again, year after year, those funds have gone not spent in full. And so we were able to reduce there. And high school tuition. There's a line in the high school budget for, Dave, I think we lost signal up on the screen. Maybe, oh, nope, it blinked and came back. We have tuition funds in the high school budget. We've been not spending all of that, but also with the efforts around places like Next Step, we're able to keep some of those things in-house and save some tuition costs. So there's an impact and a savings on high school tuition cost. So here's just a list of all of those items and the total that we've talked about in our work to get to, again, a $1 increase on the local is a reduction $753,683 on top of the $2 million that have already been reduced. And so we are fast approaching a $3 million reduction. But it's put us, I think, where the direction of both the finance subcommittee and the committee has said, we understand that there's some costs to run our schools, but let's get down to $1 as a general sense. Okay, if I change that slide.
Yeah, you can change the slide. I just, refresh us on the amount that we're aiming for, and is that because of the city council?
I don't think it's because of city at this point. I really think it's just around our finance subcommittee has been meeting and we've been discussing it. And I also, some of this is me. I'm coming into the conversation with trying to get a pulse of our community and the emails that I get and taxpayers reaching out. And I think that dollar range, I think, is something that people feel like with a valuation coming down the road and not knowing what's in the future is something that people are willing. It's a number people are willing to talk about. But I don't have specific direction. Like there was no vote that said get to $1. And I haven't heard from a city council that had said get to a specific number. I think everybody just wants us to be responsible as we can. So I want to build out the increase that we've requested. So again, this budget lands at an increase of just under $1. It's actually 99 cents, but because of the calculations, I don't know if it's like 99.7 cents or 99.0. So I just put the dollar. When city administrator Heather Hunter works these numbers, she may come up, a penny or so different. But she's seen our revenue and projections and agrees with the numbers, but the actual calculation has some room for a penny or so either way. But that's how it came out. Is last year, it was $10.73 to our taxpayers. And the projected in this current budget as proposed is $11.72. I want to talk more detail, if I could, about how the total amount of our increase and our request here locally is less than our contractual increases, which is compounding an issue that we have been facing for multiple years. Last year, we were at 815,000 above the minimum. That was another year that we did not, in the local fund, reach what the additional costs to contracts is. And so we've had to get real creative. But I want to talk more about the position that leaves us in from a multi-year conversation. So I apologize if I seem a little redundant. I know we've talked about these things, but I just wanted to circle back to them that the Easter funds, those emergency funds, they sunset in the fall of 2024. But there's also only so much in that pot. So I've become worried that there's conversations of, well, we can put that in the emergency funds. We can put that in the emergency funds. Well, we can't keep putting things in emergency funds because that money is getting spent. So we're drawing down that account. And some of those expenses are multi-year. So when we say we're going to buy supplies out of this, well, those supplies are needed every year. And so at some point, we've got to find a way to transition back, cut supplies, raise more money. And so we have to be careful with the Easter conversation. But please know from a strategy perspective, we're looking to maximize the use of those funds and the rules around them to benefit our community. And I'll share more about that. We have, again, pledged some of those funds to be strategic for mechanical upgrades, adding 25 years of life to some facilities and infrastructure that otherwise we'd be asking for LCIP funds or local funds. So that, again, I think that's a smart use of those funds. We also have to draw down those funds to maximize fund balance use. And I'll talk more about that over time, but in my head, because certain use of these funds are permissible, we're going to have to be very deliberate next year with making sure we don't create a fund balance issue. And I'll share more about that. We also want to use these funds to soften the cliff through intentional use of allowable items. So I'm not opposed to some supplies this year being in those areas. We want to spend that money. We don't want to leave it on the table. We want to soften that blow to our community, but also maintain the levels that we have for our students and our staff. But if we do certain things within our budget over the next fiscal year, we can find ourselves in a place where the funds exist without such a cliff. So it might be less of a cliff. The fund balance, as it sits, we've started this budget by proposing a use of $5 million in fund balance. We have not changed that. 5 million is a number that I'm comfortable with because of where we're at. It leaves us 2.7 and some prior year worth of change in it. I think that this fiscal year, we will not have the savings we had this year, but we will have enough to have that kind of seed as we go into next year's budget. So we won't be having a conversation that we didn't have that 5 million to start. And I'm going to share more about my concern with that. And I put on here, it's not sustainable by FY25. And what I mean is, and I'll talk about it more on our next slide, the way that excess money sits and the way it operates with different components, we're allowed to use it to kind of start our budget. So when we go from a zero place and we go through detail and we go through salary and benefits, we end up with a number of what it costs to do the business of school, but we're able to use funds from the prior year to start that process. Contractual growth, our collectively bargained salaries and benefits outpace our subsidy. Now, that's not just local. I'm not just pointing a finger here. That's state and that's mandates. That there's a lot of layers to the being outpaced by subsidy, but any revenue coming in from a place of subsidy, we're outpacing it. And in FY23, which is the budget we're working on, we've included, just to get to this math, none of the structural change positions. So when we talk about changing special ed, those are not in this calculation on purpose. After reducing 36 positions, so those are already pulled out. So we didn't add the new or the change. We took out the ones that are reduced. That number alone on a change from contractual growth for our community is $3.9 million. So that's just, you turn the year, people who have steps in their salary or percentage increases that are negotiated, they get them because a year has turned over. Any change in benefits costs, that gets incurred. So this year, mind you, with all the cuts that you've made and we've talked about, 36 positions worth. And we did not include new changes. That's $3.9 million. That's just us being with those reductions. The total local increase as proposed is 2.8. That's a shortfall that will be every single year that we don't meet that growth.
So that 3.9 is without any new negotiated contracts? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying it's with the negotiated contracts. And we put some things in the budget, not knowing when the contracts would land. So there's provisions for some of it. And we year to year manage the rest. But I guess even if there weren't negotiations right now and people just turn the clock to next year, it's $3.9 million. Just the people we have, cutting all those vacant positions.
Right, that's what I was asking. And
Yep.
Because I know that the like 6 to 7 million was thrown around last time we had a meeting. So is that like estimated with new contracts coming in and pay
So-
raises?
Yeah, so that's when we get in the conversation of projections that we believe will happen. And also some of the changes in our special education. But those are salary line specific. That's not pulling out revenue streams or anything like that or billing. But yes, it's a good point because the 7 number was around all of those pieces included. I guess what I was trying to get at here from a messaging standpoint is we're going to be as responsible as we can. But the budget when presenting you tonight, I really think is responsible as we can get, while knowing it's 1.1 short of just people getting their step, people we have getting their contractually negotiated increases. So we look at revenue streams and how we can try to figure that out. But so if one example of this, let's say we were here 12 months from now having a conversation about budget, and I said we came in at 0. I need $3.9 million or more, depending on the steps and the new negotiated contracts. That's just to be. That's not to grow. That's not to add. That's not to. So from that mindset, I think we just need to be very aware of that.
That doesn't include like let's just say you have 5 teachers that go out and get their master's degree and then they go up another level, or ed techs become teachers, or like that doesn't include
Right. So
those like potential options.
this number does not include all of that. This number includes kind of really that bare bone of no extras, the very, very simple. I think it's important for community to know and hear that when you have organizations that have multiple collective bargaining agreements, you have contracted increases that happen. But when they happen on the size of our school system with over 5,000 kids, that's the number this year. And it would only grow next year if all of our teachers stayed and got another step. And it's not just teachers, it's teachers, custodians, nutrition workers, ed techs, our management teams, administrators. It's, we have, I think, 8 different collective bargaining agreements, and it's all part of that in our personnel policies. So financial strategy, we're really thinking big picture here, but building out that the fund balance is just unspent money from previous years, but it's also excess revenue. Are you hearing a noise too? Yeah. No, it is. It's like a feedback or something. It may not be you. It sounds like it's up on the wall.
I think it's coming from like the speaker. That's okay. You don't hear that?
It's okay, Dave. I don't hear it either.
You know? Sounds like it's a cricket in that speaker.
I wonder if it's like the water fountain or something.
It might be coming out of both speakers, so you guys are hearing it over there and we're hearing it over here.
Is it that water fountain? All right,
Okay, it's all right.
we can go. We can still go. So I tried to put this slide together as like a series of steps, and I just want to. Oh, no kidding. The sounds, he should have the sound system to stop. So I want to walk you through this. It's a bit step by step, but I just want to map it out. It probably is much for anybody reviewing this video as it is anybody else, but our fund balance is money that's unspent from the previous year, but it's also excess revenue. So it can be from like next year when we do that main care billing and we projected at 400,000, let's say it's 6. Well, that's $200,000 that will land in the fund balance because it's excess revenue, money coming in. But also unhired positions, things of that nature, or anything else we can save because we used ESER, that will create, again, that fund balance. So accuracy in budgeting results in less excess. So I'm trying to get ahead of this as much as I can over a multi-year window. The more responsible we are with our budget, the tighter things become the following year because there's no excess. But right now, if less excess means less carryover, again, which I think is smart, transparent, and accurate, which is the responsible thing to do for our community, it means less seed money for the budget to start next year. So if next year we don't have $5 million in carryover, it means we have to come up with that. We have to make that difference somehow. And I'm bringing this up because I think there's a temptation. Well, there's a desire to be as accurate as we can be. I think that's the responsible thing to do. That's who I am. If you want a different approach, let me know. But I think this committee very much supports being fiscally responsible and very transparent. But over time, we want to reduce that seed money. So in a year or maybe 2, maybe that 5 million is 4 or 3.5. And what happens is we get tighter and tighter with that. You ask for the funds, you use the funds appropriately, and there's not a bunch of funds left over. But on the other side of that conversation, we're already using 5. So if we start using 4, where's the other million come from? We got to find it, we got to revenue it, or we have to cut it. Okay, or the other way we can do it is raise taxes. So I'm worried from some of the conversations that I've heard, not necessarily in this room, but just overall, well, couldn't you use more fund balance? The answer is yes, we could. But next year, we're short that money. And so I really want to avoid a pattern of using all kinds of fund balance, having no rainy day fund, and having a trajectory that gets bigger when really it needs to get smaller. We want to reduce that seed money because I put in my last bullet here, the day will come when we do not have it. And the day that we don't have it, or the year that we don't have it, we're showing up here saying, this budget with flat, nothing new, no ads, we're short $5 million. So this is just smart finance. So we're multi-year planning here, but we're trying to get ahead of that day. So we want to be very smart about how much fund balance we use this year.
And can you remind us, I would say by law, what's the maximum amount of fund balance that we're supposed to have?
Yeah, so the law, there was actually a provision put in place last year to allow for you to carry over more, and then it's gonna phase itself out back to, I think Bill knows this one. So right now it's at 9%, and in 2025, it goes back to 5%, and it goes like down. It doesn't just go 9 to 5. And they did that because of COVID. COVID and emergency funds have created fund balance situations, and the state has realized that, so it's changed those provisions. Very good question, though. But so there's two drivers to this. One is we want to be responsible and get to that place. The other is we can't be too irresponsible, not that we want to be, because we would be violation of subsidy law.
And off the top of your head, our numbers people, what is 9% versus the 5% in dollar figures? Do you guys know?
So on 9% on 100 million would be about $9 million versus $5 million. It's because it's $100 million.
Right. But so I would say, and there's some other factors to this too. You know, when we talk about unspent funds, I think is an easier part of the conversation. But when we look at unspent funds, so last year, so a full year ago, when we were at this point in time, we had a hybrid schedule. We saved over $1 million in transportation because those rides didn't run. We didn't need them. We only get billed for what we use. So there was a big savings there because of COVID. We had small cost changes that may not show up big, but they add up. Like, did you use less paper towels, less toilet paper, less tissues, less? There were things that we used less of because we had less students in the building, both at any one time, but also kids who just chose to be remote. So when those kids didn't come to school, they're not consuming anything that's at the school. So, but those things add up, less trash bags, less. And then the other COVID related things we used emergency funds for. So yes, we bought masks and sanitizer, but we use relief funds for some of those items. We also use relief funds to bulk up on some things that we knew we would use, those other consumables, again, trying to be smart with our budget. We also had a lot of unfilled positions, no need to fill them because we had this hybrid schedule and all these less kids. If you had some gaps with staffing, it was pretty easy to blend a group because you just had half your kids or a third of your kids because you were scheduled for half and some of them chose to be home. Plus COVID interruptions. So all of these little dynamics, they added up to a $7.7 million amount of money that wasn't spent. So that's what we have to work with this year. That will not happen again, maybe for the rest of our lives. I've never seen that before in education, and it was because of the pandemic. So the COVID funds, we're not gonna be able to use that for very long. That's running out. Even though there's a sunset, there's also, again, money spent. The buses will run, and they have been running more. It's getting a little better. Still some challenges and still some savings, but I would estimate next year, hopeful that those challenges are gone. And so those buses run all the time. So we use the full budget. So there's no savings there. So I guess what I'm trying to play out for you is I think we're going to be okay as long as we're smart with our finances from a fund balance use. But if we use a bunch of it this year to artificially decrease the cost, we have to make it up next year when I don't think we'll be able to.
So I know you keep saying like we're forward thinking, we're thinking into the future. And I know none of us ever want to go back into a pandemic or have those emergency funds available or
Sure.
anything like that. Can you share a little bit about what you're thinking for next year? Because I know we don't want to be sitting here next year being like,
Yeah.
where are we going to find this money? Where is this money going to come from? How are we going to even make this happen? Like,
I can. So I think we will have some fund balance this year that will be healthy enough to match what we don't use from last year. So last year's money and this year's money paired together will help us be healthy for next year's budget. And by healthy, I mean still going to be that $3.9 million question without doing anything. But I think from starting our budget with that $5 million in unexpended funds, we'll be able to be at that amount. I think we're projecting that we will be, but a year from there, we will not. And I think that's the concern that we have. But we're responsible in our approach to it. So we're good this year, I think. I think we're good next year. But if we don't do things next year to make sure we're good year 3, we'll be setting ourselves up for a financial cliff that we don't want to have.
I have a follow-up question. So is there someone or a committee or some person that looks at, like, I'm sure our energy audit is potentially going to find us savings that we can save money there. Like, and I'm comparing this to like a mom that starts couponing because she wants to save money at the grocery store. Like, there's a way that we can look overall at our services, like who we buy paper from, who we buy toilet paper from, who we buy salt from, who we buy, like all of those things to see if like those contracts maybe are not working like they were in the past and we could find it someplace else. Like, is there someone that does that? Is there people who do that?
Yeah.
Is there one? I don't know how that works.
So I don't know about couponing from the size of our organization. No, but I mean that genuinely, because there are other things that we've jumped on because we do have purchasing powers like a region. So we go into purchasing agreements for nutrition with like Auburn. We buy milk together because it's cheaper. So there's efforts that exist to do that. But do I think there's room for more examination and other opportunities? Yeah, I think we have to look at those. We have to look at those. And, a piece of this too is there's also some hope that the state subsidy will increase, but we don't know that. And that's something that it might depend on who's in office and how the revenues for the state are and how healthy they are. So, yeah, it's a bit of a matrix, but I think one of the things I really like about this finance subcommittee is we're already having those conversations. So we don't put ourselves in a aha moment. It may still hurt, but we know it's coming and we're already thinking about it. My next slide is really a recommendation, but it's, whoops. Went the wrong way. I apologize. So just my recommendation to you, and I know we have time Monday to talk about this some more, but if you ask me, Jake, as a superintendent, where are you at with all of this process and the work that's happened and the reductions that have happened and looking at all the different factors? I think it's very responsible to adopt this budget at the $1 and avoid additional fund balance use and support the changes that include, again, significant position reductions, which again have implications, but it's smarter budgeting.
Okay, I'm wondering about what that last line means. The significant position reductions. Does that mean none of the new innovations
No.
are going to happen?
So good question. I'm looking to support those changes, the ones we've talked about where we restructure things primarily in special education to improve what we do there. But the significant position reductions in addition to that is at 36 out of positions that we have reduced out of this budget, separate of those changes. Yep. And we went for the 36 that we actually went and counted because it was bigger than that. But remember, some of the positions that we've reduced, we have repurposed in that effort for change in special education. So there was far more than that, but actual straight reductions is 36. And what we didn't count on top of that, just so you know, any position where we said like that's going back to title, we didn't subtract that. That's still here. So anything that went to ESERF, we didn't subtract that. So these aren't inflated. Those are 36 actuals, not in this budget.
Mr. Bourboulon.
Thank you. And to reiterate, Jake, from an earlier meeting, no one is losing a job.
No, we have work for those positions that might be a targeted area, but we have plenty of work. So I feel confident that unless someone chooses to separate, we would be able to employ them as gainfully as we did prior to this budget.
Ms. Whitlow.
So during this budget process, we haven't talked about my passion, my focus, and that's the training the teachers and for the Orton Gillingham dyslexia. So I didn't know if anything in the budget was going to allow for teachers to get that certification or start the training at all.
I can speak to that. So the PD plan that's actually part of the ESSER funds that we put together last year still does include that. The majority of our professional development, regardless of what the topic is in the ESSER grant. But I will also add that with some of the movements that are in the proposed budget by taking those class size reduction positions out of Title II, which are still that those positions are not part of what Jake is referring to in the slides for the title position. By moving those into the local, that will free up additional Title II funds that is specifically for professional development, which will allow us to absorb some of that those professional development funds into Title II rather than in the emergency funds, which will allow us to sustain it for a longer period of time.
So can you tell us what we had in the budget last year for our teachers and how many teachers that was?
I can. So I can tell you right off the top of my head, we had budgeted for more teachers to participate than actually participated. I think we started with 4 or 5 of Lewiston teachers participating in the Dyslexia Center training that you're referring to. And then we had an additional 4 or 5 that participated in a different dyslexia course. And we've had a couple of those teachers decide to move on from Lewiston, and actually they've continued their training. Their other districts have paid for that to happen. If you give me just a second, I'll pull up the.
Yeah, I'm curious of what we actually spent to send those teachers and if we would be expecting to be around that same.
Karen, while you're doing that, I'm going to ask Jake another question. This budget, I assume, basically eliminates summer school, as we talked about.
Summer school is not included in this budget. We do, to Member Hurd's point, we do look for ways to fund things that aren't in here. We're hoping that Title I reallocation, which is unspent Title I funds that the state makes available or has in the past, we're applying for those to fund summer school using a different revenue. It's a process. We don't know year to year how much money is available, and we don't know year to year when we apply if we'll get any or some or all of the funding we request. So it's last year we got the funding we requested.
How about like Mud Week and stuff that is in here?
Yeah, so Mud Week, Ice Week, and those other pathways for students towards graduation are still in this budget.
So I was on the public Wi-Fi, which would not allow me to get into Munis. So I can only tell you which I just disconnected, I think. We had budgeted for 60, we had budgeted $60,000 for dyslexia training for over the course of the 2 years. And we have spent, see how fast I can do this. We have spent I know, nothing like everybody's watching me, right?
And has there
Oh, I'm
been,
sorry, we had 60,000 and we have spent, about half of that.
and how many teachers have actually gone to some type of training for dyslexia?
Oh,
Do we know
well,
that?
we've done some in-house training.
Yeah,
With a very large number of our staff. I was only referring to the coursework. And so that, I would say on the high end, that's probably 8 to 10 teachers, the actual coursework.
and has anybody received an actual certification yet through those?
They have their last class coming up next month, and then they have more practicum hours to finish. So I would expect that by the end of the summer, beginning of the school year, that's when they will receive their certification.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that what we're doing is being effective, and it's that our teachers are gaining those certifications, which is what we kind of wanted.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, we don't expect every teacher to be certified, but it's nice to have some certified teachers that know what they're doing to teach dyslexic kids. So I want everybody to know that we are putting a little bit of money in the budget every year to help with literacy, because that's needed so much.
And I just want to say, literacy in overall, there's more than that, but specific to that dyslexia course, it would be that 60,000.
Yeah, we're not doing 60,000 and the whole district literacy. No, no.
Correct.
But okay, I appreciate that. I'm sorry to disrupt your presentation, Jake. I just really wanted to know a little bit more because we hadn't really touched on that yet this year.
Oh, I think it's a good question. When Karen said I was on the public, if you're not on the Lewiston Public School staff link, you can't actually go to our financial system.
Yes,
So she couldn't get in, so she had to disconnect from the.
I did that. I did what you told me to.
Ms. Hurd,
Thank you. On the topic of, sorry, I'm having a brain cramp. No, trainings. We had talked a little bit about Alice training and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and we were looking at different avenues. Was that put in the is there some training and stuff like that put in the budget for next year, or
So
we haven't
we-
decided what
No,
we're doing
so
yet?
we've decided to use some in-house expertise, and with the waiver, we're actually going to have a day full of kind of crisis training with staff. I don't, he's not one to grab credit, but Steve Reese, who is our law enforcement instructor at LRTC, is actually a known trainer around the state with both public and private institutions for doing just this. And he's offered to volunteer his time and services if it'll help keep our staff and kids safe. So with the waiver and the contract time remaining, we're going to do a full day of in part theory, but then also scenarios so that people can actually be thoughtful and considerate of their own spaces. But to your question, we did reach out to organizations and for those certification platforms for our staff, it was upwards of $50,000 just to maintain it. And we were at a point that we had to get a whole team of train the trainers trained again. And that was going to be probably $12,000 to $14,000 over the summer to get someone here to do that work with a group of our size. So all in all, it was looking at a very expensive proposition to go with Alice training. Good theory, and I think the theory we're looking at is very similar. It's just not trademarked. Yep.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, is this going to a vote tonight for the school committee?
It's not unless you want to do something different, which I hadn't anticipated. I'm trying to change my slide. It'll indicate some next steps, but it's not going. I don't dare touch it because when I do, it's going to go too. There it goes. So in our next meeting, which is Monday, unless there's a desire for a different meeting, it's a regular meeting, but that is April 4th is a scheduled date for the school committee to adopt the budget from the work that you all have done, provide input on changes. But 1 week from April 4th on the 12th is when we present to the city. And depending on how things go with the city, we go from there. We have a town hall meeting so we can share the information with the public, and we start putting together the very legal documentation for the warrant article and things like that. So things move very quickly from this point. It's not that you couldn't vote on the budget tonight. I think it would take a series of steps, and this is a workshop. So I would recommend waiting till Monday to have a regular meeting where people knew in advance that that's the date to be voted on in case there's some other input to consider. But yeah, good question though about process.
Thank you. I don't know if it's appropriate to ask Linda. I know when we were here last time with city council, they had just received our budget, their budget, a little overwhelming. Like what are you hearing? Your council members?
So-
think, or
Last night we had a meeting. We went over some more departments, but there's been no definitive talk yet from any of them on where they want to land with this budget. And I think we were waiting till we had next week's meetings where we start really digging into that. Because we've been putting stuff on a list as we're going through each department, what we want to discuss, what we want to maybe talk about eliminating or those sorts of things. But we've not had anybody's, any conversation about this is where we want to land. Are we going to make it there? And I believe that that'll happen next week. We do have now that we have this number, we know we're voting on this for Monday night. We do have a press conference tomorrow where everybody will be there. And I'm going to bring it up and try to see if they can. I think it's important that they reach out, that we reach out to them. When we go to them on the 14th, that we're not voting for that on the 14th. That's just your presentation to the city council. And then city council votes on it in a couple more weeks after that, I believe.
Yeah, it's the 12th, and they do vote thereafter. I believe it is the first Tuesday in May. I'm not sure of the date. I can check our binder though.
I did want to add that I was a little concerned with the Sun Journal putting an article out today with original numbers that said that the city of Lewiston, between the school and the city council, was looking at a $4 a plus increase to the mill rate, which in my personal opinion, and shame on the Sun Journal, and I'm not afraid to say this publicly, is really false and gets people riled up and excited and worried and concerned and get this whole conversation going, which actually can put pressure on elected officials before we even finish having those conversations. So I say shame on the Sun Journal for doing that, because the reality is we can see we've already dropped ours by how much, right? And I know city council is going to do the same thing. We're not even close to that $4+. So I think that that's something that, and we see this every year, which is actually quite shameful because it does set a precedence and it does get people concerned. And then without knowing everything that's happening, people go, I don't know, I call it the clinch syndrome, right? We ain't gonna be able to do that. And everybody gets riled up. And I think that's highly inappropriate because it's not the reality of the situation and it's not the reality of our conversations. So I'm very concerned about that. I would recommend still that we all reach out to our city council counterparts and make sure that those conversations are happening. And I will say it again to them to reach out, because I'm hoping that when we present on the 14th, that we're going to know clearly that day what the city council wants, in case we have to come back and do any conversation. And I also hope that when Jake presents to the city council that you all come, because that doesn't happen every year. A lot of times we have that joint workshop where we're all together. But when they do the final presentation to city council, a lot of times it's just the chair and the superintendent. And I think if we want to build this relationship and we want to make sure we're having those conversations, we need to be there together.
I think that would be great. The support would be great. Just some dates, just because I went to the actual binder. So we'll present, or I'll present at City Hall on the 12th at the city council meeting. And on the 3rd is the actual city council, it's the scheduled vote to hopefully adopt the budget. On Thursday, the 5th, we have a budget town hall. We do that here, or we just do general answers, Q&A with anyone who has questions about it. And then the 10th is the scheduled referendum work. So that it happens pretty quickly once we get beyond Monday. And to your point, Member Scott, that this committee has reduced this budget, found corrections, gone through things at a very fine level, and has gone with a reduction of $3 million. And if I can go back to one of my prior slides, what you have decided, I'm hopeful Monday there'll be support, but what this committee is looking at is reducing this budget by a couple $1 million below what we're looking at for just contracted increases, but we're also doing some dynamic things within that constraint. I'm proud of this budget and the work that's gone into it, from the team I've worked with over here, but also the team we've worked with here between the finance subcommittee and being committed to our community. I really think this is a responsible budget that allows us to continue to do good things. But again, it has been reduced by $3 million. That is a substantial number, and 36 positions. I don't know what organization is carving out 36 positions while also still maintaining a dynamic approach.
Mr. Bopal.
Thank you. I've gone on record before by saying how impressed I was at a very early stage with former member Potvin, now citizen Potvin's acumen on the budget. I mean, no disrespect to the financial team that has dug through this, but I think Ron doesn't have the same dog in the fight as we do. And I was wondering if he has anything that he'd like to add from his experience with budgets on this, representing the citizenry, shall we say. Thank you. If that's all right with the members.
I was just gonna say that would be up to usually the chair to decide that on workshop, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, typically in workshop, we don't take public comment, but I guess all things considered, Ron does have a significant background and experience on it. I'll allow it.
Thank you.
And I'm still a member of the finance committee, so I kind of want to say I would consider myself like staff almost. So, and seeing how hard the staff has worked to get to this point, no matter how you shake it, just putting in perspective, you guys are in between a rock and a hard place and a very, very tight vice in the next 3 years. Without even talking about budget, you cannot emphasize enough the impact of a revaluation of city properties and just the horror that the city across the bridge experienced. There's going to be so many dynamics that are going to be in place that there's going to be a lot of external pressure. I had a very good conversation today with somebody who said something that really made a lot of sense. And that was, so you want to increase the school budget, given everything we're going through? Yes. Why? And we talked it out. And we said, when you're a local adult member in the community and you're paying taxes and you're enjoying city services, And those services may become deficient. You can pick a fight with City Hall. You can form an organization. You can choose to pack up your house and leave the city as an adult. As a child, needing to experience 12 years of 13 years of education, what is your out? There are 5,500 kids that I guess I would like to see them all lined up and hear what their concerns are, because they're citizens of this city also. And so when it was put to me that way, I was like, yeah, and I think that's why we move forward with the proposals for the school budget, because we're standing up for those that don't have a voice, really. They do in a way, but not in the way that adults do when talking about taxes and services and so forth. And I know I've mentioned it serving before, that I've always felt these budgets have been anemic, not addressing so many things. And we've come so far to address so many items in there. And this staff has gone out of their way to find the detail that you see and figuring out what's strategic, what can we do? So moving forward, I think that it's reasonable to accept an increase this year. And I think it's responsible. I was one of the voices Jake spoke of, trying to push the fund balance a little bit more. But the more we evaluated it and took a look at it, and I was like, you know what? The next 2 years got a lot of question marks. So let's be safer than sorry. And by being a little bit more conservative on the fund balance, you're creating a buffer. On top of just the fund balance alone, you have many items that the superintendent alluded to that are revenue generators that could be adding to the fund balance. So you got a couple balance, what happens with Medicare, with what the changes in special ed, some of the other items that we talked about in the finance committee that have the possibility of creating 100,000 there, 200,000. So there's buffers in there. And I think that as far as the school department goes, I think this has been a lot of responsible work, a lot of good points. One part that wasn't mentioned tonight, and I'm sure you'll bring it up in the future, is we had a lot of discussion about talking about items that will have an impact in future budgets. But it's not going to apply this year because you can't change it that quick. But there are some items to look at that possibly, that could make a budgetary difference in the future next year, hopefully. So, with all that in mind, I think you're solid with the fund balance. I think you're solid with revenue projections. I think it's reasonable to ask the public for a $1 increase. And Member Bowden made a point about cost of living increase and what people are experiencing. And when we take a look at what the whole world's going through, and it's 5 to 7% at this point. We're not immune to that as a school department. And we've experienced those 5-7% hits. And it's reasonable to ask and what I've received as John Q Public is there are people who are like, just keep it reasonable. We understand there's increased costs. So when she mentioned that, at first I wanted a 0. I was pushing for a 0, but it wasn't reasonable to go there. What was reasonable is we need to sustain the school department as is and get a reasonable cost of living from the public. And coming in at this figure, maybe a little bit high, I don't know, but it's representative of that impact of the cost of living. So, and it puts this school department in the best position this year and moving into two years. Don't forget, you have your ESSERF cliff next year where all of that funding disappears. We got to figure out Just as you're sitting here today, your questions are already sitting in front of you for next year. The member from Ward 6, you mentioned it, that, well, what do we have to look at for the next year? What's the crystal ball say? You already know about the ESERF. You already know about the fund balance. If you have a reval not going in the right direction, and Paul, I'm sure you experienced it when you were working in Auburn, what we went through, we reduced the Auburn School Department 10%. That was a huge number because of the outrage of the reval. Now, hopefully Lewiston doesn't go through anything like that, but it has to be there. It has to be on your table. You have to be conscious of it, as the city council, I'm sure, is going to remind everybody. And if it's a push to keep things at zero or somewhere, then, you got to take that into account. So with all that being said, I think this is a responsible budget moving forward. Numbers are good. The work is there. And I guess I would like, as a member of the public, I'd like to hear what the council has to say and where they're going with it and what the city side is going to look like. So I think we're in good shape and putting in a responsible way for next year, the following years coming up.
Thank you, Ron. All set. So
Yeah, I can entertain any other questions that people may have, or if anybody wants to share some direction for any adjustments before Monday. That's all I have for tonight.
I guess, and to follow up a bit with from where Ms. Scott is, I think we're looking, I was upset by the paper as well. That was talking about, there was such a cliff at the $30 mark last year that and it sounded like that we we're going to blow that all out of the water with what the paper printed. But what we saw is, of course, it's still going to be something in the range of $30. There's probably no way of getting it below $30 again. But what the public needs to hear too is that the school's contribution to that $30 rate is still less than $12. The rest of it, the other $18, has nothing to do with us. That's all on the city side, and it's all on between county and everything else. They're seeing they've got the same type of challenges as far as their contractual relationships with their unions. Everybody's fighting for workforce, and there's not out there. We've eliminated 36 positions, and I think I saw in the paper that the city was adding 6. So they're adding 6 out of about 400, and we're cutting 35 out of over 1,000. So from my perspective, we're doing our part to try to contain this. And I would have to agree with, with the superintendent, and everybody on the finance committee. Thank you for the work on that, because that's how we have to be able to sell this. But if you've been to the gas pump in the last 2 weeks, that's affecting every building. You get your light bill, that's gone up. We've got, 2.5 million square feet of occupiable space that we're trying to sustain, heat it and everything. So it has to go up. There's no way you can hold it to zero, not in these inflationary times. And so I know I'm all in support of where we're at the moment. I think the work has been done. I'm hoping that we can sell it not only to the council, but to the general public. Hopefully we can all do our part to reach out to our cohorts and try to let them understand, where it's at. So that's all I have, Ms. Whitlow.
Yeah. So I've had a constituent reach out to me quite a bit over the last few weeks about the bus situation and the frustration with buses and the kid not being able to get to school and work, and it all super valid frustrations with the district. And so I guess how are we going to address that? Is there a way to address that in the budget for next year? We're still in contract. I just want the public to be aware of how we're handling all of this. Here's this XYZ and all that.
So it's a good question and obviously a very challenging thing. I'd very much like to not spend my 5 a.m. hour figuring out who's going to be on the road and who's not, and messaging, all the people that need to know. We've got some good news today that Hudson had, I believe, 2 different drivers pass their certification. One will be in a bus as early as this week, and the other looks like next week. So from that perspective, some of it's getting better. We're hopeful. But I also, I know that we have a challenge because we are in a contract and we get billed for what we use. We actually kind of bounced around an idea, actually might have been on finance subcommittee, just what would it take if we took on our own buses? And we started thinking about, okay, let's zoom out for a moment and look at it from the cost of a bus is in the $100,000+ range. We don't have a place to park them. We don't have a place to service them. We don't have a mechanic to service them. We'd have to hire our own drivers. We would likely have a union-based operation, so our cost per driver would be significantly more. We'd be buying our own fuel instead of connected to that contract and the structures that we have now. And we'd have to have more capacity to also oversee all of that because all of those pieces, you add a whole division and you have that challenge. And I know that that's really not an option for us at this point in time. So Hudson's working very hard. I would also encourage people, if you can't get your student to school, call the school. Where they are able to, they are using the vans with consent from parents, picking kids up, getting kids home. I actually talked to a parent earlier this week who was pretty frustrated, and it was fair, and I don't disagree with him. But he didn't realize he could call the school, and he did call the school and was able to make an arrangement with that team, and they had the staff to pull it off. I can't make promises to people because if a school is 37 people short that day, they don't have anyone to drive to watch the students in the school to spare, never mind drive kids around, but there's always that effort. So we're looking to bridge any gaps that we can. A while back, I know that this committee said, what else could we do? And I sent a message to the state about National Guard, other resources. It just hasn't played into that level of need, I think, statewide. So my long answer is I don't have a great answer, but I am hopeful it will get better. And if you're listening and you have an interest in driving a bus, please reach out to Hudson. But I also want to clarify something that was out there earlier this week. You do not need to be vaccinated to work for Lewiston Public Schools or drive a bus for COVID. That was a rumor that was out there. So just as a correction, if you were thinking about driving but don't want to be vaccinated, that's up to you. That's not a condition of employment. So that might help bring some more people in. So spread the word.
Thank you.
Are there other comments or concerns from the committee about where we're at? Well, I guess seeing none, I guess I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved by Ms. Bowden, second by Ms. Medina. All in favor? So moved. Thank you.